I never thought shoveling snow at 5 in the morning would land me in a war with the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. But here we are in northern Vermont, where apparently my early bird work ethic is somehow more offensive than leaving everyone trapped by snowdrifts. My name is Samuel O'Brien, and I've been living in this subdivision outside Burlington for 3 years now, running my small landscaping and snow removal business from my property on the edge of the development. The setup was perfect when I moved here because I owned the only private road that connected the entire subdivision to the main highway, a little detail that would become extremely important later. The first snow of the season came early that year, mid-November, dumping about 8 inches overnight. I woke up at 4:30 like always, made my coffee, and by 5 I was outside with my snowblower clearing my driveway. The machine was loud, sure, but it was a quality Honda model that I'd invested in specifically because it was actually quieter than most commercial units. I'd never had a complaint in 3 years, not once. My nearest neighbor was a good 100 feet away, and most people appreciated waking up to already clear walkways since I usually did the main access road right after my property. I was halfway through my driveway when my phone buzzed. It was barely 5:30 in the morning, and I couldn't imagine who would be texting me this early. I pulled off my glove to check, and saw it was from Brenda Patterson, the president of the Pinewood Heights HOA. The message was curt and demanding, asking me to stop making noise before 7 a.m. as it violated community standards. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Community standards. I'd read those documents front to back before buying my property, and there was nothing about snow removal times. Besides, my property wasn't even technically part of the HOA, another crucial detail I'd made sure of before purchasing. I decided to finish what I was doing and deal with Brenda later. By 6 a.m., I had my driveway done and was attaching the plow blade to my truck to clear the access road like I always did. This road was interesting from a legal standpoint because it ran through my property for about a quarter mile before connecting to the subdivision proper. When the developer originally built Pinewood Heights back in the 90s, he'd worked out an easement with the previous owner of my land, allowing residents access through the private road. When I bought the property, that easement transferred to me, but with specific conditions. I was responsible for maintaining the road, but I also had the right to use it however I needed for my business, and I could regulate its use within reason. The road had never been adopted by the town, which meant the HOA had no authority over it whatsoever. They tried to buy it from me once, about a year after I moved in, offering an insultingly low price. I declined politely, and that had been the end of it, or so I thought. Now it seemed Brenda had decided to flex her perceived authority in other ways. I was plowing down the access road when I saw her standing at the entrance to the subdivision, still in her bathrobe but with a heavy coat thrown over it, fuzzy slippers already soaked through with snow. Brenda was probably 55, with that severe short haircut that screamed middle management and a permanent expression like she just smelled something unpleasant. She flagged me down aggressively, waving her arms like she was directing traffic at a disaster site. I stopped the truck and rolled down my window. Cold air rushed in immediately. "Morning, Brenda. What's going on? I sent you a text an hour ago, Samuel. Did you not see it?" Her voice had that particular quality of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. I saw it. I was in the middle of clearing my driveway, though, couldn't exactly stop halfway through. The community quiet hours are clearly posted in the HOA guidelines. No loud noises before 7 a.m. on weekdays, 8 a.m. on weekends. You're in clear violation. I kept my voice level, though irritation was already building. Brenda, I'm not part of the HOA. My property isn't in the subdivision. I'm not bound by those rules. Your actions affect our residents, which means you need to comply. Multiple people have complained about the noise. Multiple people. Who? Because I've lived here 3 years and never heard a single complaint about my snow removal schedule. People generally appreciate being able to get to work without wading through snow. Her jaw tightened. That's not the point. The point is you're disturbing the peace during protected quiet hours. If you continue, we'll be forced to take action. What kind of action? I asked, genuinely curious what she thought she could do. We have legal options available to us. I suggest you comply voluntarily. She turned on her heel, her wet slippers squelching, and marched back toward the subdivision. I sat there for a moment, watching her retreating form, then continued plowing. I finished the access road in another 20 minutes, pushing the snow into neat berms on either side. Several residents waved at me gratefully as they headed out to work, including my neighbor Tom, who gave me a thumbs up. Whatever complaints Brenda claimed to have received, they clearly weren't universal. That afternoon, I got a formal letter in my email from the HOA attorney. It was full of legal language that essentially repeated what Brenda had said, claiming I was creating a nuisance and demanding I cease all snow removal activities before 7 a.m. The letter mentioned potential legal action if I didn't comply, including seeking an injunction. I forwarded it immediately to my own attorney, Marcus Chen, who I'd worked with on the property purchase and a few business contracts over the years. Marcus called me within an hour. "This is garbage, Sam. They have no standing here. Your property isn't in the HOA, you're not subject to their rules, and you're performing maintenance on your own private road. They can't do anything." That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. Do you want me to send them a response? I thought about it for a moment, watching the snow fall again outside my window. We were supposed to get another storm that night. Not yet. Let me see how this plays out. The next morning, I deliberately waited until 7 a.m. to start my snow removal. We'd gotten another 6 inches overnight, and by the time I got out there, my driveway was already a mess. It took me twice as long to clear it, and I didn't finish until almost 8:30. By then, I was running late for a client appointment, and I definitely didn't have time to plow the access road. I got angry texts and calls all day from residents who couldn't get out of the subdivision. The snow had already been packed down by a few cars attempting to drive through it, making it even harder to clear. Tom called me around noon, apologetic but desperate. "Hey Sam, I know you're busy, but any chance you can clear the road? Some of us are stuck here." "I'd love to, Tom, but HOA rules say I can't make noise before 7 a.m. By the time I finish my own property following those guidelines, I don't have time to do the access road before my paying jobs." There was a pause. "Wait, HOA rules. You're not even in the HOA. Tell that to Brenda." She sent me a legal threat yesterday saying I have to comply with their quiet hours. That's insane. Most of us leave for work by 7:30. If you wait until 7 to start, we're all trapped. I know, but I've been threatened with legal action if I don't comply, so my hands are tied. Tom swore under his breath. "This is ridiculous. I'm going to call Brenda." Good luck with that. Over the next few days, a clear pattern emerged. It snowed almost every night, typical for Vermont in late November. I would wait until 7 a.m. to start my snow removal as demanded, take care of my own property first, and then leave for my actual business appointments. The access road remained unplowed. The subdivision had 42 homes, and by the third day, I'd received calls from at least 20 different residents, all frustrated and confused about why I wasn't clearing the road anymore. I explained the situation to each one patiently. Brenda had demanded I stop clearing snow before 7 a.m. Since I couldn't do my own property and the access road after 7 without being late for work, I decided to prioritize my own property and my paying customers. The access road, which I'd been clearing out of the goodness of my heart for 3 years, was no longer part of my morning routine. Some residents were understanding, others were angry, but all of them seemed to direct their frustration toward the HOA. I started hearing rumors about heated arguments at an emergency HOA meeting Brenda called. Apparently, she was insisting that I was deliberately sabotaging the subdivision, and that they needed to hire a private snow removal company to handle the access road. The problem was, that would cost money, and it would require a special assessment since snow removal for a private road wasn't included in the current HOA budget. Tom called me after that meeting, laughing despite his obvious frustration. Brenda proposed a $500 special assessment per household to hire a snow removal company, just for the access road for the rest of winter. People nearly rioted. Someone calculated it would cost less than $2,000 for the whole season if they just paid you directly, but Brenda said that would be rewarding bad behavior. Bad behavior being me clearing snow before 7 a.m. Exactly. Several people pointed out that you're not even in the HOA, so they can't enforce quiet hours on you, but she's dug in. She keeps saying it's about principle and community standards. The next snowfall was a big one, almost 14 inches overnight. I woke up at my usual 4:30, but I stayed in bed until 6:45. When I finally got up and looked outside, my driveway was completely buried, and I could see the access road was impassable. It was a weekday, and I knew most people needed to get to work. I made my coffee slowly, checked my email, responded to some client inquiries, and at exactly 7 a.m. I started my snowblower. My phone started ringing before I even finished my driveway. I let everything go to voicemail. By the time I finished my property around 9:30, I had 17 missed calls and probably 30 text messages. The access road would take at least an hour to plow properly with accumulation this heavy, and I had a commercial client expecting me at 10. The choice was obvious. I loaded my equipment and headed out for my appointment, driving through my property and taking the long way around to avoid the subdivision entirely. My truck had 4-wheel drive and could handle unplowed roads, but I knew most of the subdivision residents weren't as equipped. I felt a little guilty, but I also knew this situation wasn't my creation. I'd been doing everyone a favor for 3 years, and the moment Brenda decided to throw her weight around, she'd ruined a good thing for everyone. That evening, I came home to find a printed notice stuck to my door. It was from the HOA, informing me that I was in violation of the easement agreement and demanding I maintain the access road in passable condition year-round. I read it twice, then called Marcus. "They're citing the easement," he said after I'd explained. "Let me pull the original document. Hold on." I heard paper rustling in the background. "Okay, here it is. The easement grants residents the right to use the road to access the public highway. It states that the property owner is responsible for maintaining the road in a condition that allows reasonable access." That's you. My stomach sank. "So they can force me to plow." Well, here's the thing. The easement defines maintaining as preventing the road from becoming structurally unsound and keeping it passable for standard vehicles under normal conditions. The key word is normal conditions. A heavy snowfall isn't a normal condition. It's a weather event. And more importantly, The easement says you have to maintain the road, but it doesn't specify how or when you have to perform that maintenance. So I could plow it at midnight if I wanted. You could plow it whenever you want. They have no say in your schedule. And here's the really interesting part. You've been plowing the road for 3 years as a courtesy, not as an obligation. You've been going above and beyond what the easement requires. The easement just says the road has to be maintained in passable condition, but it doesn't define what passable means or how quickly after a weather event you need to address it. If you cleared it once a week during winter, you'd probably still be meeting your legal obligations. I smiled for the first time in days. So if I wanted to clear the road every Sunday evening, that would fulfill the easement. Technically, yes. Though they might try to argue that's not reasonable, but they'd have a hard time proving it, especially since you're not charging them anything for a service that would typically cost thousands of dollars per season. What if I just stopped clearing it altogether? That would be riskier. If the road became truly impassable for an extended period, they might have grounds to take you to court. But occasional snow accumulation between clearings, that's just Vermont in winter. Everyone deals with it. We talked through various scenarios for another 20 minutes, and by the end of the call, I had a plan. I drafted a letter to the HOA, which Marcus reviewed and approved, explaining that I would continue to maintain the access road in accordance with the easement agreement. However, due to my business schedule and the HOA's insistence that I comply with quiet hours that were interfering with my normal routine, I would now be clearing the access road on Sunday evenings after 6 p.m. This would ensure the road was maintained in passable condition at least once per week throughout the winter season, fulfilling my obligations under the easement. I sent the letter on Friday evening. The response was immediate and explosive. Brenda called me at 8 p.m., her voice shaking with anger. "You cannot be serious. Once a week. People have jobs, Samuel. They need to get out of the subdivision. Then you should have thought of that before you demanded I change my 3-year routine that was working perfectly for everyone. This is blackmail. You're holding the entire subdivision hostage. No, I'm complying with both the easement agreement and your noise restrictions. You can't have it both ways, Brenda. Either I'm free to clear snow on my schedule, which means early morning before everyone needs to leave, or I have to follow your arbitrary quiet hours and fit road clearing into my schedule when it's convenient. You chose the latter. We'll sue you. Talk to your lawyer first." I already talked to mine. I'm meeting every legal obligation I have. You, on the other hand, have been trying to enforce HOA rules on property that isn't in the HOA. I've been doing you all a favor for years, and you responded by threatening me with legal action. She hung up on me. I wasn't surprised. That weekend was chaos in Pinewood Heights. It snowed again on Saturday night, another 8 inches, and by Sunday morning the access road was a disaster. Several residents tried to drive through anyway and got stuck, blocking the road even more effectively. I watched from my window as people tried to dig out cars with completely inadequate shovels, slipping in the snow, clearly miserable. Part of me wanted to go help, to just hook up the plow and clear everything like I always had. But I knew if I gave in now, nothing would change. Brenda would see it as weakness, and I'd be right back where I started, being threatened with legal action while performing a free service for 42 households. Sunday evening at 6 p.m., as promised, I plowed the access road. It took almost 2 hours because of how badly packed down and rutted the snow had become. Several residents came out to watch, and a few approached me afterward. One of them was Angela Morrison, who lived about 3 houses into the subdivision. "Sam, this is insane," she said. her arms crossed against the cold. "Most of us had no idea Brenda sent you that letter. When it came up at the meeting, she made it sound like you just decided to stop plowing for no reason. She didn't tell people she threatened me with legal action for clearing snow at 5 a.m. No. She said you were being uncooperative and refusing to follow reasonable community guidelines. A bunch of us are furious. We've started a petition to call for an emergency election to remove her as HOA president." That was interesting news. "How many signatures do you have?" 28 households so far. We need 2/3 approval, which is 28 households, so we just made it, but we think we can get more. Nobody wants to pay a $500 special assessment when you've been doing this for free for 3 years. Brenda's not going to step down quietly. We know. But we're done with this. She's been on a power trip for 2 years now, ever since she got elected. This snow thing is just the last straw. Over the next week, I stuck to my schedule. Sunday evening plowing only. It snowed 3 more times, and each time the subdivision became increasingly difficult to navigate. Some residents bought snow shovels and started trying to clear the road manually, but it was a 1/4 mile long and they couldn't keep up. Others carpooled, leaving their cars at my property line where the road was clear, and having someone with a truck or SUV shuttle them back and forth. It was inefficient and frustrating for everyone, which was exactly the point. Meanwhile, the petition to remove Brenda gained momentum. By the second week of December, 35 households had signed on, well over the required threshold. An emergency meeting was scheduled for December 15th, and I was formally invited to attend and explain my side of the situation. The meeting was held at the community center in the middle of the subdivision, a small building that was usually used for HOA gatherings and the occasional neighborhood party. I arrived at 7 p.m. to find the parking lot full and the room packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. The energy in the room was tense, and I could see the subdivision had split into factions. About 2/3 of the room seemed friendly toward me, nodding or waving when I entered. The other third glared at me like I'd personally wronged them. Brenda sat at the front table with the other HOA board members, her expression stony. Beside her was Linda Murphy, the vice president, who looked profoundly uncomfortable. The treasurer, Robert Simmons, and secretary, Janet Keeley, both looked like they wished they were anywhere else. The meeting was called to order, and Angela Morrison, as the petition organizer, was given the floor first. She stood up, holding a folder full of documents, and addressed the room with surprising confidence. "Thank you all for coming. We're here tonight because of a situation that's affected all of us over the past few weeks. For those who don't know the full story, here's what happened." She went on to explain everything, from my 3 years of early morning snow removal to Brenda's threatening letter to my decision to comply with her demands by limiting my plowing schedule. She presented the timeline clearly, including copies of the letters and emails that several residents had received from the HOA. "Sam has been providing a free service to this entire community for 3 years, Angela said, her voice rising with emotion. "A service that would cost each of us $500 this season if we hired a professional company. He never asked for compensation, never complained, never made demands. He just did it because he's a good neighbor." And the moment Brenda decided his 5 a.m. start time was personally inconvenient to her, she threatened him with legal action despite the fact that his property isn't even part of the HOA and she has no authority over him. "That's not what happened," Brenda interrupted, standing up abruptly. "Samuel has been creating a noise nuisance for years. Multiple residents have complained." "Name them," someone called out from the audience, Because I've lived here for 8 years and I never heard anyone complain until you brought it up. Yeah, another voice added. I'd like to know who these multiple residents are too. Brenda's face flushed. Complaints were made confidentially. Convenient, Tom shouted from the back. Real convenient that you can claim complaints exist but won't tell us who made them. The room erupted in crosstalk. Brenda tried to regain control by banging her gavel, but people were angry and talking over her. Finally, Robert Simmons stood up and raised his hands for quiet. Okay, everyone, please. Let's maintain order. He waited until the room settled, then turned to Brenda. Brenda, I think people have a right to know if these complaints actually exist. This decision has affected the entire subdivision, and it was made without consulting the board or the general membership. I don't need to consult the board on enforcing community standards, Brenda said defensively. You do when those standards don't actually apply to the person you're trying to enforce them on, Robert countered. Sam's property isn't in the HOA. You know that. We all know that. You've been trying to exert authority you don't have, and it's backfired spectacularly. This was not going the way Brenda had expected. She looked around the table for support, but Linda, Robert, and Janet all avoided her gaze. She was on her own. I want to hear from Sam, someone called out. Let him tell his side. All eyes turned to me. I stood up, suddenly aware of how much the room's mood could shift depending on what I said next. I kept my voice calm and factual. I don't have much to add to what Angela already said. She covered it accurately. I moved here 3 years ago specifically because I could run my landscaping business from my property without being subject to HOA restrictions. Part of my business is snow removal, which means I keep early hours during winter. I've always cleared the access road as a courtesy because it's the neighborly thing to do. When Brenda threatened me with legal action for doing exactly what I'd been doing for 3 years, I had to make a choice. I could ignore her threat and risk an expensive legal battle, or I could comply with what she demanded. I chose to comply. But you stopped clearing the road regularly, Brenda interjected. You're punishing the entire subdivision because of a personal dispute. I'm clearing the road once a week, which meets my legal obligations under the easement. If you want me to clear it more often on my original schedule, then I need to be able to work on my schedule, which means early mornings. You can't have it both ways. Either you accept that I'm not part of the HOA and leave me alone to maintain the road as I see fit, or you keep trying to control when and how I work, and you deal with the consequences. Which is holding us hostage, a woman I didn't recognize said from the front row. She looked angry, and I could tell she was part of the anti-Sam faction. No, I said firmly. I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm fulfilling my legal obligations while also complying with the demands made by your HOA president. If you don't like the result, that's something you need to take up with her, not me. I've been more than reasonable. You could just ignore her, the woman shot back. You could keep plowing like you always did, and get sued. I'm running a business. I can't afford to be in constant legal battles because your HOA president doesn't like being woken up at 5 a.m. If you want early morning snow removal, you need leadership that understands basic property law and neighborly cooperation. That seemed to land. The room went quiet for a moment, and then the debate shifted. People started arguing among themselves about what should happen next. The anti-Brenda faction was clearly larger and more vocal, but Brenda's supporters were dug in, insisting that community standards mattered and that I was being unreasonable. Finally, Linda Murphy stood up. She'd been quiet the whole evening, but now she looked tired and frustrated. I think we need to take a vote on 2 things. First, whether to remove Brenda as HOA president for overstepping her authority and creating this situation. Second, whether to formally apologize to Sam and ask him to resume his original snow removal schedule without interference from the HOA. Agreed, Robert said immediately. Janet nodded as well. Brenda looked like she wanted to object, but she was outvoted on her own board. The vote was conducted by secret ballot to avoid intimidation. All 42 households were represented, either in person or by proxy. The counting took about 20 minutes, during which the room buzzed with anxious conversation. I stood off to the side, talking quietly with Tom and Angela, trying to gauge how I thought it would go. When the results were announced, it wasn't even close. 38 households voted to remove Brenda as president. 36 voted in favor of apologizing to me and requesting I resume my original schedule. Brenda had lost decisively. She stood there for a moment, her face pale, looking around the room like she couldn't believe what had just happened. Then she gathered her papers, shoved them into her bag, and walked out without a word. A few of her supporters followed, but most people stayed, looking relieved. Linda took over as acting president, and the first thing she did was address me directly. Sam, on behalf of the Pinewood Heights HOA, I want to formally apologize for how you were treated. You've been an asset to this community, and you were threatened for no good reason. If you're willing to go back to your original schedule, we promise there will be no interference from the HOA moving forward. We'll put it in writing if you want. I appreciate that, Linda. I don't need it in writing. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen again. If someone has a legitimate noise complaint in the future, I'm happy to discuss it and find solutions. But I'm not going to be threatened or bullied for doing something helpful. Absolutely. That's more than fair. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, and several residents came up to thank me personally and apologize for the situation. Some offered to chip in money for my time and gas, but I declined. I hadn't been doing it for money, and I didn't want to start charging now. It was just the right thing to do. I went back to my early morning schedule the next day. It snowed overnight, and I was out at 5 a.m. with my snowblower, then plowed the access road by 6:30. When people started leaving for work around 7, everything was clear and easy to navigate. I got more waves and thank yous that morning than I'd received in the previous 3 years combined. For about a week, everything seemed back to normal. Brenda stayed out of sight, and I heard through the grapevine that she was considering moving out of the subdivision entirely. Linda was well liked as acting president, and the board quickly moved to schedule an official election to fill the position permanently. I didn't pay much attention to the politics of it. I just focused on my work and my routine. Then things got weird. It started with my truck. I came out one morning in late December to find all 4 tires slashed. Not just flat, but cut deep enough that they were completely destroyed. I had to call a tow truck to take it to a shop, and the mechanic confirmed someone had done it deliberately. It cost me nearly $800 to replace all 4 tires, and I lost a full day of work dealing with it. I filed a police report, but without security cameras or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. The officer who took my statement, a young guy named Officer Peterson, seemed sympathetic but realistic about the chances of catching whoever did it. Could be random vandalism, he said, but given what you've told me about the HOA situation, it could also be retaliation. You might want to invest in some cameras. I took his advice and installed a security system that week, including cameras covering my driveway, the access road, and the perimeter of my property. It was expensive, but I figured it was worth the peace of mind. 2 days after I installed the cameras, they caught something. At 2 a.m., A car pulled up to the edge of my property, and someone got out and scattered nails across the access road. The camera quality wasn't great in the dark, but I could make out enough details to see it was a woman in dark clothing, and the car looked like a dark-colored sedan. I couldn't see the license plate clearly enough to rate it, but I downloaded the footage and called Officer Peterson. He came out the next morning to review the footage. "That's definitely intentional," he said, watching the video on my laptop. "Can you enhance the plate?" "This isn't CSI," I said. "The resolution is what it is, but I have a pretty good idea who it might be." "Brenda Patterson." "That's my guess. She drives a dark blue Honda Accord, and she's the only person with a clear motive. Let me take this footage back to the station. Maybe our tech guy can clean it up enough to read the plate. In the meantime, you should clear those nails before someone drives over them." I spent the next hour carefully sweeping the access road, collecting nails in a bucket. There were at least 200 of them scattered across a 50-foot stretch. If someone had driven through them at speed, it would have destroyed their tires and potentially caused an accident. This wasn't just vandalism anymore. This was dangerous. The police came back 2 days later with news. They'd enhanced the footage enough to get a partial plate, and combined with the car description, they'd identified the vehicle as belonging to Brenda Patterson. Officer Peterson and a detective came to interview her, and she denied everything, claiming she'd been home asleep at 2 a.m. and someone must have stolen her car without her knowledge. The problem was, they couldn't prove she was lying. Without a clear view of the driver's face or someone willing to testify they saw her, the case was circumstantial. The detective, a middle-aged woman named Detective Rogers, explained it to me frankly. "We know it was probably her," she said, "but probably isn't enough for charges. However, we've documented everything, and we've made it clear to her that she's a suspect. We also warned her that if anything else happens to your property or the access road, she'll be the first person we investigate. Sometimes that's enough to get people to back off." It wasn't enough. 3 days later, my mailbox was knocked over, torn completely out of the ground. The cameras showed the same car, same time frame, but again no clear shot of the driver. Then someone dumped garbage across my driveway while I was out on a job. Then my snowblower's fuel line was cut overnight when I'd left it in my shed. Each incident was reported to the police, and each time the evidence pointed toward Brenda, but never conclusively enough for charges. It was like she knew exactly where the cameras were and how to stay just out of clear view. Detective Rogers suggested I add more cameras, which I did, essentially turning my property into a surveillance zone. The subdivision residents were horrified when word got around about what was happening. Angela Morrison organized a neighborhood watch specifically to keep an eye on my property, and several residents volunteered to take shifts watching overnight. I appreciated the gesture, but I told them it wasn't necessary. I had cameras, and I was documenting everything. Eventually, Brenda would slip up. The slip-up came in early January. We got hit with a massive snowstorm, over 2 feet in 36 hours. It was the kind of storm that shut down schools and made the governor declare a state of emergency. I was working around the clock clearing properties for my clients, including several commercial lots that needed to be accessible for emergency services. I barely slept for 3 days straight. On the third night, exhausted and running on nothing but coffee and adrenaline, I came home around midnight to find the access road blocked. Someone had dragged fallen tree branches and debris into the middle of the road, creating a barrier that completely prevented access to the subdivision. My cameras had caught it happening at 11 p.m., and this time, the person hadn't been as careful. The footage clearly showed Brenda's face as she struggled to drag a large branch across the road. I called Detective Rogers immediately. She sounded tired when she answered, probably dealing with storm-related incidents all over Burlington, but she perked up when I told her what I had. "You're sure it's her face on camera?" "Crystal clear." She was wearing a headlamp, and when she looked up at one point, the light illuminated her face perfectly. "It's definitely Brenda Patterson." "Don't touch anything. I'm sending officers over now." 2 patrol cars arrived within 30 minutes, followed by Detective Rogers 20 minutes after that. They reviewed the footage, photographed the debris blocking the road, and then went to Brenda's house to arrest her. I watched from my property as they knocked on her door, spoke with her briefly, and then led her out in handcuffs. She was still in her winter coat and boots, and she looked shocked that this was actually happening. The charges ended up being more serious than I expected. Beyond the vandalism and property damage, blocking the access road during a state of emergency was its own crime, especially since it prevented emergency vehicle access to 42 homes. The prosecutor also added charges related to the nail incident, since that could have caused traffic accidents. With the accumulated evidence from all the previous incidents, Brenda was looking at potential jail time. The preliminary hearing was in late January. I had to testify about the timeline of events and present the camera footage. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that she'd been under extreme stress and wasn't thinking clearly, but the prosecutor pointed out that the incidents had been calculated and repeated over several weeks, showing clear intent and premeditation. The judge wasn't sympathetic. He set bail at $10,000 and ordered Brenda to stay away from both my property and the subdivision pending trial. She made bail and moved in with her sister in South Burlington, effectively removing herself from Pinewood Heights entirely. The trial itself was scheduled for March, but before it got that far, Brenda's attorney approached the prosecutor with a plea deal. She would plead guilty to vandalism and obstruction charges in exchange for reduced sentencing and probation instead of jail time. Part of the deal required her to pay full restitution for all the damage she'd caused, which came to nearly $4,000, covering my tires, mailbox, snowblower repairs, and the security system I'd had to install. I was fine with the plea deal. I wasn't interested in seeing Brenda go to jail. I just wanted the harassment to stop and to be compensated for my losses. The judge accepted the plea, and in early April, Brenda was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay the restitution in full within 90 days. She was also required to continue staying away from Pinewood Heights and to attend anger management counseling. Life in the subdivision slowly returned to normal. Linda Murphy was officially elected as HOA president in February, running unopposed. One of her first acts was to pass a formal resolution thanking me for my years of service maintaining the access road and explicitly stating that the HOA had no authority over my property or my work schedule. It was symbolic, but appreciated. Tom and Angela became good friends of mine, often inviting me over for dinner or weekend barbecues. The sense of community in Pinewood Heights actually improved after the whole incident. People seemed more aware of their neighbors and more appreciative of the little things that made the subdivision function smoothly. Several residents started helping each other with snow removal on their individual properties, creating an informal support network that hadn't existed before. By the time spring arrived and the snow finally melted, I'd almost forgotten how the whole thing started with a simple text message telling me to stop shoveling snow before 7 a.m. It seemed absurd in retrospect that such a minor complaint could spiral into vandalism, arrests, and criminal charges. But it was also a reminder that HOAs, even in small subdivisions, could become toxic when the wrong person got a little bit of power and decided to abuse it. I continued my landscaping business through the summer and fall, and when the first snow came again in November, I was back to my 5 a.m. routine without hesitation. This time, there were no complaints, no threatening letters, no legal demands. Just appreciation from neighbors who valued the work I did and understood that being part of a community meant respecting each other's contributions, even if they came early in the morning. The access road remained my responsibility under the easement, but now it felt less like an obligation and more like something I chose to do because it was right. Linda checked in with me periodically to make sure everything was okay and to thank me for my continued help. The new HOA board was functional and reasonable, focused on actual community issues rather than power trips and petty grievances. Brenda completed her probation and community service without incident. I heard she eventually moved to New Hampshire to live with family, wanting a fresh start away from the memories of what had happened. I didn't harbor any ill will toward her, honestly. She'd made bad choices driven by ego and stubbornness, and she'd paid the price for them. That was enough for me. The security cameras stayed up, though, because I wasn't naive enough to think lightning couldn't strike twice. But they mostly just recorded boring footage of snowfall, occasional wildlife, and the daily comings and goings of a peaceful suburban subdivision in northern Vermont. On quiet mornings when I was out before dawn with my snowblower, watching the snow swirl in the glow of my porch light, I sometimes thought about how close I'd come to giving in during those difficult weeks. It would have been easier to just ignore Brenda's demands and keep doing what I'd always done, risking the legal threats. Or I could have given up entirely and let the subdivision deal with their own snow removal problems permanently. Instead, I'd held firm on principle. I'd insisted on being treated with respect, and had refused to be bullied by someone who thought an HOA title gave them authority they didn't have. It had cost me money, time, and peace of mind in the short term, but in the long term, it had strengthened the community and established clear boundaries that protected everyone. The lesson, if there was one, wasn't about snow removal or HOAs or property rights. It was simpler than that. It was about standing up for yourself when someone tries to push you around, even when it's difficult, even when it would be easier to just go along to get along. Sometimes, you have to be willing to let things get worse before they can get better. And in the end, watching the sun rise over the Green Mountains while clearing snow from roads that connected my neighbors to their daily lives, knowing I was doing it on my own terms and with their genuine appreciation, that was worth everything. The second winter came and went without incident. I refined my routine, upgraded my equipment, and even hired a part-time helper to assist with the larger commercial jobs. My business grew, partially because of the reputation I'd gained during the whole HOA situation. People around Burlington heard the story and liked the idea of working with someone who stood up for himself and his principles. It was free advertising, in a strange way. Tom retired from his job at the university in May and started spending more time on community projects. He and I collaborated on a neighborhood improvement plan that included better drainage for the access road and some landscaping enhancements at the subdivision entrance. The HOA funded the materials, and I provided the labor at cost. It was a good example of how things could work when everyone approached situations with mutual respect and cooperation. By the third winter, the whole incident with Brenda felt like ancient history. New families had moved into the subdivision, including a young couple with 2 small kids who bought Brenda's old house. They were friendly and normal, and they appreciated the snow removal just like everyone else. The kids liked to watch me work from their window, and I'd wave to them each morning. The access road, that quarter-mile strip of pavement that had become the center of so much conflict, was just a road again. Nothing more, nothing less. I maintained it because it was my responsibility and because it helped my neighbors. The HOA left me alone to work on my schedule. And every winter morning at 5 a.m., when I fired up my snowblower and started clearing the white accumulation from another Vermont storm, I did it with satisfaction, knowing that sometimes the best way to handle unreasonable demands is to take them at face value and let the consequences speak for themselves. The subdivision thrived. My business thrived. And the community learned something valuable about the difference between authority and power, between rules and common sense, between demanding compliance and earning cooperation. Those were lessons that extended far beyond snow removal, and they made Pinewood Heights a better place to live for everyone involved. On the anniversary of that first threatening text message, Angela organized a neighborhood party at the community center. It wasn't officially about the HOA situation, just a general winter celebration, but several people made toasts thanking me for my service to the community. Linda presented me with a plaque that read, "Pinewood Heights Unofficial Snow Removal Hero," with the dates of my service engraved below. It was tongue-in-cheek but heartfelt, and I hung it proudly in my garage. Tom pulled me aside during the party, beer in hand, grinning. "You know, when this all started, I thought you were crazy. I figured you should just ignore Brenda and keep doing your thing. But watching how you handled it, making them live with the consequences of their own rules, that was genius. You didn't fight them directly, you just made them fight themselves." "I just refused to be bullied," I said. "Everything else followed from that." "Yeah, but you did it smart. You didn't violate the easement, you didn't break any laws, you didn't give them ammunition to use against you. You just stepped back and let them realize what they'd lose if they kept pushing. That takes discipline, or stubbornness. Same thing sometimes." We clinked our beer bottles together and watched the party continue around us. Kids running around playing tag, adults chatting and laughing. The community center warm and bright against the dark winter night outside. It was a good moment, one of those times when you realize that standing up for yourself wasn't just about you. It was about setting a tone for how people treat each other. The story spread beyond Pinewood Heights, too. A local newspaper did a feature on it, interviewing me and several subdivision residents about the conflict and resolution. The article focused on the broader issue of HOA overreach and property rights, using my situation as a case study. It generated enough interest that I was invited to speak at a town council meeting about easements and private road maintenance, sharing my experience and the lessons learned. That speaking engagement led to a few consulting opportunities, helping other property owners navigate similar situations with their HOAs. I didn't become a full-time consultant or anything, but I did help a handful of people understand their rights and stand up to unreasonable demands. Each situation was different, but the core principle was always the same. Know your legal position, document everything, and don't be afraid to hold people accountable for the consequences of their decisions. Years passed. The conflict with Brenda became a story I tell occasionally, usually when someone new moved into the area and asked about the access road arrangement. Most people found it hard to believe it had escalated so far, but Tom and Angela were always quick to confirm that, yes, it really happened exactly like I described. The access road itself got repaved in the 5th year, a project I undertook with partial funding from the HOA since they acknowledged it benefited everyone. The new asphalt made snow removal even easier, and I invested in a newer plow truck with better lights and more efficient equipment. The early morning routine continued unchanged, a rhythm as reliable as the seasons themselves. Linda served 2 successful terms as HOA president before stepping down to focus on her grandchildren. The board that followed maintained the same reasonable approach, focused on genuine community needs rather than power plays. The subdivision became known as one of the friendlier, more functional neighborhoods in the Burlington area, and property values reflected that reputation. I eventually married a woman I met through one of my commercial clients, a project manager named Natalie who appreciated my work ethic and my refusal to compromise on principles. We built a life together on my property at the edge of Pinewood Heights, raising a dog and maintaining the business that had become more successful than I'd ever imagined. And every winter, without fail, I was up at 5 a.m. clearing snow, maintaining the access road that connected my neighbors to the wider world, doing it on my terms and with the respect I'd fought to establish. The snowblower's engine was a familiar sound. The plow blade scraping pavement was a comforting rhythm, and the sight of clear roads at dawn was a small victory repeated hundreds of times each season. The HOA never bothered me again about noise or timing or any other aspect of how I maintained the road. They'd learned their lesson, and I'd learned mine. Sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable demands is to comply with them exactly, forcing the people making those demands to confront the full implications of what they're asking for. It's a form of peaceful resistance, of standing your ground without aggression, of letting natural consequences do the teaching. Brenda's story had a reasonably happy ending too, from what I heard. After completing her probation and moving to New Hampshire, she apparently went through genuine personal growth. Angela, who stayed in touch with some of Brenda's former friends, told me she'd gotten involved in community mediation training and was working to help resolve disputes before they escalated. It was like she'd learned from her mistakes and decided to become part of the solution rather than continuing to be a problem. I respected that. The security cameras eventually came down after 5 years without incident. I kept the system for my workshop and the valuable equipment stored there, but the intense surveillance of the access road and driveway felt unnecessary after that much time had passed. The neighborhood had earned back that trust. Tom passed away unexpectedly in year 7, a heart attack at 68 that shocked everyone. His funeral was held at the community center, and it seemed like the entire subdivision attended. During the service, his wife mentioned how much Tom had valued the sense of community in Pinewood Heights, and how he'd always said the HOA conflict, as difficult as it was at the time, had ultimately brought everyone closer together. She thanked me specifically for being the kind of neighbor who stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. That hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't thought of the situation in those terms, as something noble or particularly courageous. I'd just been defending my right to run my business and live my life without unreasonable interference. But Tom had seen something bigger in it, some kind of lesson about community and respect and standing up to bullies. Maybe he was right. Life continued its steady rhythm through the years. Kids in the subdivision grew up, went to college, some came back and bought homes nearby. New families moved in, old families moved out. The HOA board changed composition regularly, but the culture established after Brenda's departure remained consistent. Reasonable, focused on genuine community needs, respectful of boundaries. My business evolved too. I hired more employees, expanded into full-service property management for commercial clients, and eventually opened a small office in downtown Burlington. but I never moved away from my property at the edge of Pinewood Heights, and I never stopped personally handling the early morning snow removal on the access road. It was my routine, my meditation, my contribution to the place I called home. The story became local legend, the kind of tale people would reference when discussing HOA disputes or property rights. "Remember that guy who stopped plowing the road?" someone would say, and others would nod knowingly. It was shorthand for standing up to petty authority, for understanding the power of consequences, for knowing when to fight and when to simply step back and let situations resolve themselves. Looking back now, with the clarity that only time and distance can provide, I understand that the conflict was never really about snow removal or noise ordinances or HOA authority. It was about respect, about recognizing that relationships in a community have to be built on mutual understanding rather than imposed authority. Brenda had tried to use her position to control something she had no right to control, and the community had rejected that approach decisively. The resolution had required patience, documentation, legal clarity, and a willingness to endure short-term discomfort for long-term principle. Those aren't easy things to maintain when you're in the middle of a conflict, when people are angry at you, when your property is being vandalized, when it would be so much simpler to just give in. But holding firm had been worth it, not just for me but for everyone in Pinewood Heights. The access road still runs through my property, connecting 42 households to the main highway. On winter mornings, I still clear it before dawn, watching the snow billow behind my plow blade, feeling the satisfaction of work well done. The subdivision residents still wave in thanks, still appreciate the service, still respect the boundaries that were established through trial and conflict. And somewhere in New Hampshire, Brenda Patterson hopefully learned that real authority comes from service and respect, not from titles and demands. The HOA presidency gave her power, but it was how she chose to use that power that determined the outcome. She chose poorly, paid the price, and apparently grew from the experience. As for me, I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't require aggression or confrontation. Sometimes it just requires consistency, clarity about your rights, and the patience to let natural consequences unfold. The subdivision learned that HOA authority has limits, that good neighbors are worth more than strict rule enforcement, and that communities function best when built on cooperation rather than coercion. The story of HOA demanding I stop shoveling snow early, and my decision to stop plowing their access road completely in response, became a teaching moment that echoed through the years. It influenced how the new HOA board approached decisions, how residents thought about their relationships with neighbors, and how I understood my own role in the community. Every winter brings new snow, new challenges, new opportunities to serve or to withhold service, to help or to stand back. And every winter, I choose to help, but on terms established through that difficult conflict years ago. Terms that respect my autonomy, my business needs, my right to manage my own property and schedule. Terms that recognize I'm doing a favor, not fulfilling an obligation beyond the basic easement requirements. The balance works because it was fought for, because both sides learned important lessons, because the community made clear what kind of leadership they valued and what kind they would reject. That's democracy in miniature, the self-governance that makes neighborhoods function or fail depending on how people handle power when they get it. In the end, this story isn't unique. Across America, in thousands of HOAs and subdivisions and planned communities, similar conflicts play out with varying results. Some resolve peacefully, others end in lawsuits, Still others result in people moving away or communities fracturing. Pinewood Heights got lucky in a way. The conflict happened, escalated, got resolved, and left the community stronger and more aware. But luck had less to do with it than choices. My choice to stand firm on principle. The residents' choice to hold their leadership accountable. Brenda's eventual choice to accept consequences and grow from mistakes. Linda's choice to lead with common sense and respect. Each decision built on the others, creating a path from conflict to resolution to improvement. That's the real story behind those early morning snow removal sessions. Behind the rumble of the plow blade and the swirl of snow in the headlights and the clear roads at dawn. It's a story about what happens when someone tries to abuse limited authority, when that abuse gets challenged effectively, and when a community decides what kind of place they want to be. It's a good story, ultimately. Not easy, not simple, but good in the way that matters most. It made things better for everyone involved, taught valuable lessons, and established principles that would serve the community for years to come. And every winter morning at 5 a.m., when I fire up that snowblower and head out into the cold Vermont darkness, I'm reminded that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the most community-minded thing you can do.